My apologies for the opening hymn. I looked at the words at home. I really liked it. I hummed a couple of the notes. I'm like, oh, we know that. Apparently not. You know, it's been a morning of a lot of discombobulation. Do you have that sense? Here and there. And I think it's God's way to let us practice to stay, maybe not calm, but at least kind, under pressure and in the midst of discombobulation. So thank you for hanging with it. And I'm... The next song may up for it, because that's such a beautiful song. Yes. So last week, if you remember, or maybe not, pastors always forget that people usually don't remember their sermons over time. But last week I spoke about the singing revolution that took place in Estonia. It was from 1987 to 1991, when the Estonian people called upon their rich heritage of singing together, mass singing, choral singing, to stage a revolution. And it was so powerful that in the end, their ruling party kind of went along, and they ended up in 1991 to gain their independence. Well, lo and behold, this week, I got the Alameda Journal, which is an itty-bitty journal in an itty-bitty town. And it says the East Bay Kids Choir visits Estonia and Finland to sing at a music festival. So they just recently did so, and they went to sing at what's called the Laulupidu Song Festival. Choirs come together from all over the world, and it is the largest choral singing event in the world, in Estonia. So the beauty and richness of the Estonian people, which held on to their tradition, which has served the resistance movement, is still there to serve people, to bring people together, to create unity and harmony. And it's a tradition that still teaches the next generation how powerful music can be. Will you pray with me? God, we thank you for music, even when we don't quite know it. God, we thank you that we are so privy to hear so much beautiful music in this place. And God, we pray now that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts resonate within your spirit. Amen. Amen. So our reading is from the 6th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. And the Gospel of Mark is quite compact. So in the 6th chapter, we hear about how the 12 apostles get sent out. We hear about the feeding of the 5,000 people, the loaves and the fishes. We hear Jesus walking on water. We hear how many people come to him and get healed. And then these verses, the verses 30 to 34, which we heard this morning, are actually the opening verses to that story of the 5,000. And that story is quite compelling and quite fascinating, you know, where there's only a few loaves and a few fishes, and Jesus somehow manages to feed all of the people. But we so quickly go to that story, I think, that we hardly ever really listen to these first couple of verses. Now, verse 30 starts with the information that the apostles gather around Jesus and report to him all that they have done. Well, see, Jesus had gone from village to village with his apostle, and then after he called these 12, he calls them to them, and then he sends them out, 2 by 2, and he gives them an authority to heal impure spirits. He gives them the authority to teach and to preach on their own. Now, by the time Jesus did that, he already had healed quite a few people. He healed a demon-possessed man. He had driven out an impure spirit. He had healed a paralyzed man. He healed a couple of times on the Sabbath. So the disciples had seen Jesus in action. They had heard some of his words and his teachings. But I still wonder how challenging it must have been to the disciples to be sent out at that point, early on in Jesus' work, with the words, now you go out and do the same. That is what we call quite a learning curve. And we don't know how long the disciples had been on their own, but at some point they come back to Jesus. He gathers them around him, and we read that the disciples report to him all that they have done and all that they have taught. Now, over time, I've gotten such a sense of Jesus as a teacher. When he heals publicly, with the community gathered so that all the people can see what happens, and all the people can understand that he really has come to heal the sick. And even more so, that he has come to oppose the structures that keep people in a place of being sick, that keep people in a place of being outcast. And when Jesus speaks, he does the same. He speaks in community so that all who gathered can hear him. And then Jesus is very intentional in making sure that there were people who really got what he was all about. That there were people who understood how God intended for the people to live together, to be together, and that those people would be able to carry that forward. So he chose 12 disciples. Over time, he gathered more followers. And he makes sure that they see what he does. He makes sure that they hear his words. And from time to time, he will sit down with them and explain it a little further, because it was really hard for them, as you can imagine, to grasp what he was really talking about. And then he sends them out. It's a bit like an early internship. So they go out on their own, and it looks like afterwards that Jesus sits down with them, and then he listens to what they have done, to what they have preached, to how they have healed people. It's a great teaching model, right? Watch me do it. Go out and do it on your own. Come back and let's talk about it. And then in the very next verse, and maybe they're not even done talking, we hear that so many people kept coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat. And then Jesus says to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." Come with me to a quiet place and get some rest. I've never seen that verse in the Bible. I've heard or read about the story of feeding the 5,000 multiple times. I even preached about it, but I don't think I ever really read or heard this verse. Really. Jesus said, "Come with me by yourself to a quiet place and get some rest." Now, how many of you have pondered that particular verse? See, right after that, we go to the feeding of the 5,000. So that's where we go. That's where we kind of get stuck. But here is that one verse. Come with me. Come and get some rest. I don't see any hands go up. So maybe you're in the same boat as I am. And it may be my Dutch heritage. We are known to be an industrious people. Growing up 10 years after the Second World War ended, the whole country seemed to be working hard to lift itself out of a deep depression. My father worked and studied, and then he worked and studied, and then he worked and studied some more. My mother was tasked with keeping 6 kids and the house clean, and there was a strict schedule in doing so. One Monday, all of the windows inside of the house on the first floor, second floor had to be washed. And the next Monday, all of the windows outside of the house, upstairs and downstairs, needed to be washed as well. The Dutch really like clean windows. Now, the other day I was at Cindy's school, and I heard one of the little children, and I mean little children, say, "I need to take a rest." And I thought, you're a kid. I mean, what do you need to rest for? And how do those words even come into your mind? And of course, children do need to take a rest, otherwise they go kind of haywire. Now, somewhat of a good work ethics has served me well over the years. And I am still learning what it means to be able to rest within my own body self. Still learning how vital rest is to the work we are doing, how vital rest is in a world where we are bombarded with information, most of the time very challenging information. We are so exposed and so aware of the needs that are out there, and what we are witnessing seems to be taking a toll on our collective mental health and well-being. I still cannot imagine what a well-rested world would look like. Can you imagine that? What does a well-rested world look like? And for the disciples, so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat. But the people kept coming. And so they end up feeding all of the people. And again, Jesus tries to find a place to pray, to be quiet, while the disciples are out on the lake. And then Jesus joins them by walking over water towards them. That's also in the 6th chapter. And we usually get caught in that, not caught, but usually we kind of zone in on that story as well, the story of Jesus walking on water. But it ends with that they land in Gennesaret and they anchor there. And then we hear, but as soon as they get out of the boat, people recognize Jesus. They run throughout the whole region and carry the sick on mats wherever he was. And wherever he went, into villages, into towns, countryside, they placed their sick in the marketplace. And they begged him to at least let them touch the cloak, the edge of his cloak. And all who touched him were healed. So the people begged for healing. They begged to be maybe even able to touch him. So many people desperate in a society that refuses to take care of them. A society out to support the wealthy, support those in power at expense of the people. Every act of injustice breaks down in somebody's body, whether it's physically or mentally. That was true then, it is certainly true now as well. So the people were on him. He was inundated. And in the midst of that, Jesus says to those who follow him, "Come with me by yourself to a quiet place and let's get some rest." He's teaching the disciples what they need in order to sustain themselves, in order to do the work that he's calling them to do, and he knows that it is still a long road ahead of them. Now, we've talked these last couple of weeks about ways to resist the dynamics of a society which seems to have become so much more unkind, so much more greedy, so much harsher, and so dangerous to the people who are just trying to make a living here. Just a couple of weeks ago, we heard that the attendance of the Real Life Church, which is nesting in our community, that their attendance is down because people are scared that ICE will raid the churches. And so besides speaking up, besides protesting and taking care of people however we can, we also talked about how compassion is an act of resistance, how music is an act of resistance, healing and joy, acts of resistance. And looking at the text this week, maybe we could add that rest is an act of resistance. Rest as a way to resist this grind culture that seems to ask more and more of us. Rest as a way to resist feeling like whatever we do is just not enough. Rest as a way to stay close to the presence of the one who is calling us. Tricia Hersey wrote a book with exactly that title, Rest is Resistance. And she says that many of us have a somewhat troubling relationship with rest. We live in a world where gathering more, working more, doing more is highly valued as part of our capitalistic society. And we tend to judge ourselves. We tend to judge ourselves by what we are putting out in the world, by how much we can accomplish. It's a very pervasive thought pattern. Not only during our working years. I hear people who are retired, who volunteer their time, who take care of other people, who have the courage to witness what is going on in the world. I heard all of those people say as well, I don't think I am doing enough. And those thoughts, as thoughts go, can easily turn into a feeling of not feeling like we are enough. It becomes part of our identity. Whatever we do is not enough, and therefore, we are not enough. Allowing ourselves to deeply rest within our own being becomes an act of disrupting those dynamics, disrupting those thought patterns, and it encourages us to see that in order to do what we are doing, we need times of rest, we need times of restoration. A time to allow ourselves to reclaim our wholeness, of reconnecting with ourselves to what is sacred, to the presence of the divine inside of us and all around us. And I love the words of Henry David Thoreau, who described this way of reconnecting to something larger so beautifully. When he says, there were times when I just could not afford to sacrifice the beauty of the present moment to anything I could do, to any work, either by hands or by heart. Sometimes he said, I would sit on a summer morning in the sunny doorway from sunrise until noon, wrapped in the revelry amidst the pines in an undisturbed solitude, until by the sun falling in the window, I was reminded that time had lapsed. And then he says this, he says, I grew in those seasons, like corn in the night. And then he says, they were not time subtracted from my life. So those were not hours lost. Those were hours added and above my usual allowance. I grew in those times, he said. You ever had that experience where you just sit deep in beauty or deep in thought and you feel reconnected and something inside of you connects back to a wholeness, to a beauty? Rest as a time to grow into greater wholeness so that we can do the work we do from that place and not from a place of scarcity. Not from a place of like, oh, I need to do more because we are not doing enough. And we find other places in the scriptures where rest is woven into the fabric of creation, woven into the fabric of society. Even God rested on the seventh day. And the Sabbath was declared holy and intended to be a day of rest, of reconnecting with oneself and one's intention, reconnecting to the divine. Jesus, in teaching the disciples, was well aware of how much was coming at them, how many people were in need to be healed, to be fed, to be touched. And you can almost feel the urgency of the people in that time, reflecting the urgency of the people and the needs we see around us now. A need for relief from hunger, relief from fear, relief from oppression. And Tricia Hershey mentions how Black people and marginalized community have historically been forced to work tirelessly just to survive, often at the expense of their own well-being. And that reclaiming rest, she says, is an act of liberation and an act of healing. It is a form of resistance that challenges societal norms. It supports liberation and wholeness on a personal level and on a collective level. Now, how we get to these places of rest is probably different for each of us. Some of us find it in community. Some of us find it in prayer. Some of us find it out in nature or catching up with a really good friend. We usually don't get there by watching TV, although TV can be a wonderful distraction. I have nothing against TV, but that's usually not how we get to a place of restoration. But rest as a time to grow into greater wholeness, as a restorative practice that allows us to drop into a place of well-being that allows us to drop into a place of kindness within ourselves and towards ourselves. See, when we say be kind, automatically we think about being kind to other people. But what if we carry kindness just inside of ourselves, just for ourselves? Or love, if that's an easier word for you to use. But what about carrying that just inside of ourselves? As a people of God, we follow the teachings of Jesus. And we may have overlooked this particular teaching a bit. Come with me by yourselves, Jesus says, to a quiet place. And come, let's get some rest. Because the road ahead is a long one. So I was thinking of, and I asked Jason to just play a little bit and let you think for a few minutes about where your places of restoration are, where your places of rests are. And after that, maybe I'll ask 3 or 4 people to speak about that. But let's just allow ourselves to drop in and reconnect with like, hey, where are those places of deep rest for me?